Welcome to the Ring Collective. I am Angelica Leloai, and I am the CEO and founder of the Ring Collective. This space is for honest conversations about growth, the profession, and everything that shapes us along the way. Because here's the thing, becoming a clinician changes you. So let's talk about it. Hi, Kay. Thank you for coming in today and being here.
I'm stoked. I'm happy to be here.
Well, take me back to PT school. What was that version of you like, and who was she?
And it's so crazy. I was thinking about this recently. I was reflecting back on all my CSMs and I was like, wow, I've been practicing clinician for almost 5 years now. I'm starting to edge out of early clinician, which is crazy. That person in PT school was so optimistic, so driven, and so determined, but was also hitting so many roadblocks unsupported to where she felt like she wasn't enough. And I think that it can impact your psyche and that damage to that, oh man, maybe I'm not cut out for this, which is terrifying. And I'm not sure I ever had that feeling because I wanted it so bad. It was borderline spite, but she was definitely like questioning the legitimacy of how I could basically bust my way through and actually get what I wanted.
And that's an interesting thing to bring up because if you asked me the same question, but before I started PT school, I would have even said that maybe this isn't even the route I would have taken. As much as I think PT school, because I've said it through and through since I was 13, I'm going to go to
Mhm.
PT school. But the right before part, I was like, you know what? I don't know. Like, and
Yeah.
I, but I do like your version of I'm going to do this no matter what I got to do, I'm going to do it.
The transitions are, I think, the hardest part, getting enough inertia to get over that hump. And I think about it a lot, that like carnival bowling ball game where you have to like roll with just enough force where it doesn't roll back onto you. And it's like,
Uh,
how much can I push this to get to that center spot where I'm not going too far into the deep end and getting, feedback that's not necessarily equivalent to what I'm trying to portray, but also being balanced in enough to actually show my worth.
Can you go off of that a little bit more in terms of the feedback that you were getting? What kind of barrier was that putting for you?
So long story short, I was not diagnosed with ADHD until my last year of grad school. I was 23 years old. And up until that point, I did have testing accommodations for test anxiety. And like, we just knew I needed a little bit extra. And so I was able to get that through support from my university. But I wasn't medicated. I didn't have like the proper stimulant medication. I didn't have the right regulatory techniques to handle those situations. So when I was placed in these situations where I thought I had to be perfect without people, it's like asking someone who's been in a coma for 3 days to get up and walk without an assistive device. You wouldn't do it. And I think it's challenging for physical therapists to see disabilities and hurdles that aren't visual. And also we're very high achieving people. And to see others just struggle, it's easy for a lot of people to say, well, maybe this just isn't for you right now. And that was something I got a lot, was take an extra year and maybe, we take this slower, and I'm like, I can't afford that. I've already come too far to drop out. I know I want this so bad that I will be restless unless I am doing this every day for the rest of my life. And also, it's it was really a failure is not an option point, but one of the advice I got was, it is really hard sometimes to conceptualize being the bottom of the top 10%. And it was such a backhanded compliment of
That's
like,
a crazy thing to say. You're the top 10, the top of the top.
well, that's what her point was, is she's like, it seems like you're really struggling with your identity. And I'm like, no, I'm struggling because y'all aren't giving me the ability to step back and take a breath like I actually would have clinically. Like, this is like a bad, like, I feel like you're asking me to be on MasterChef when I should be on Worst Cooks in America. Like, I need a little bit more here, guys, and it's okay. Um, but it was so bizarre because she's like, "Yeah, everybody who comes in this entry-level program was, like, the top valedictorians of their high school, and then you come in and there are some people who are just not gonna be the top of this class." And I was like, "Yeah, but I'd like to stay in this class. Like, I don't want to like, what are you that doesn't make me feel better. Thanks for trying."
I've even gotten advice like that now, being in school. I had a moment where I almost went on academic probation. And for me, it, I was reaching burnout as a student. And that was one of the things they told me. You're in a hard program. Maybe you should take a step back and stop. And
And
I was
academic
like,
probation is so silly because it's a B minus average.
mhm,
The MPTE has a 62% pass rate. So they are putting you on academic probation because they are afraid for some reason that you are going to drop down another 20% and ruin their whatever metrics of first-time MPTE pass rates.
mhm,
Like, be so for real. We are forgetting to build empathetic providers by
mhm,
forcing them into these just strategic pinholes of testing.
mhm. And that actually goes so far because people or students are now getting to that point of, I'm just going to know what I need to know to go on this test, and that's all I'm going to know. And when I go out to clinicals, if you can't talk to me in A plus B, I can't tell you C. And that's
Mhm.
where, as much as I love the education portion of school, sometimes with how hard we push students, you can hinder their ability to have that relationship with the specialty or with the work itself. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Physical therapy is the marketing of the healthcare world. We are a marketing degree. Because if you are coming to see my partner in the ER, like you're going to do whatever he says regardless because it is life or death. If you're coming to see me, it is most of the time a willing full inertia to come and get to where you need to be with me. And then you have to make decisions every single time, yes or no. And it is my job every day to, whether I want to or not, persuade you that you have to care about this. PTs are the best, OTs are the best marketers in healthcare in terms of
Mhm,
patient compliance. And that is, we are a hard science with a soft skill, and we can't afford to lose our soft skills. Our patients cannot afford for us to lose our soft skills, and they're not
mhm.
supported enough.
It's that big point where a lot of the times when they come to us, it's the first time they've had someone who's going to sit down and be like, "How's your day? What's
Mhm,
really going on behind what you're feeling?" Because you go to a doctor's appointment, maybe you get 5 minutes,
mhm,
and you probably spend more time with getting your vitals. It's an
mhm.
honest truth. As much as we don't want it to be, it is what it is. And it's not until you go to OT, PT, SLP, where you have someone be like, you know what? Let's take a step back. Tell me about you. And now let's go forward. And it's all about the salience at the end of the day. How are you, like you said, how am I going to market this where you're going to say, you know what? Yes, what you said is important, and I'm going to roll with it now.
And that's the thing is, like, the person sitting in front of me does not care if I'm Googling a Finkelstein test when I'm pretending to document, point
You know,
blank.
funny thing, when I learned that in class, we made the joke of like Finkelstein to your Tinkelstein, and we would go
Oh my
like
god, I
this.
love it.
So we always made, as soon as you said it, I just had that memory pop up in my head.
That's what I'm saying. We need create, and PTs are so creative in this field, and it's just not being portrayed in that education sector. And I will say I had two really amazing mentors in the PT curriculum championing for me and giving me that support. And so they
Mhm,
are there, but it is a way of navigating the seas of not meeting metrics. I was once when I was talking about ableism in the field of physical therapy at a CSM conference, this one woman asked me, she's like, how many handouts and how many passovers, how many passes are we giving to people before it's too much? And I was like, I will tell you right now, I have been passed on more than I've been given passes in my life. And if you are putting or a student on academic probation and you are rating them on a metric of like you're not meeting X, Y, and Z, Where is your metric as a program to meet those support needs of that student? Like, where are you checking in to see where maybe as an institution this person fell through the cracks? Because that's holistic healthcare, that's equity at its core. And we can't expect our providers to do the same for patients, to see where maybe their nutrition is not equitable, maybe their access to getting to clinic is not equitable, all of these different barriers. If we, from the core of our own educational systems, are not looking at our barriers for our students' success.
That's a great point to bring up because I think that is something that's being talked about more now. But I
Hmm.
will say when I was in undergrad, it was a fake it until you make it. And it was more for me, it was like fake it and just hope you don't burn out. Like smile along the way and don't tell anyone.
And there's a time and a place for all of that. And it's just a matter of balancing it with the right support systems. Because there's going to be things you don't like, right? I am not a neuro girly. And I know that. And I can't do the biomechanics of a foot or an orthotic or vestibular. I know my limitations, but I can talk to you for 7 hours about the pelvic floor, you know? And so it's finding those ways, and we all need each other to kind of round this stuff out and pick each other up. And sometimes it is being creative with these solutions, and that doesn't mean that that person requiring a creative solution is getting a handout or something more than other students. We have to kind of move away from this equality model. It's hurting the profession.
It's more that we need to broaden how we reach out to students. And I wanted to circle back. You did mention you had a couple mentors that really stood out to you. How did they approach you and how did that work for you as a student trying to get through PT school?
Yeah, I mean, one of them, Dr. Ginge Kettenbach's, literally housed me when I did not have housing, when I could not afford housing. So I lived with her rent free for 3.5 years. And to this day, she is the singular reason I am a physical therapist, because she allowed me the opportunity to stay in PT school and somewhat recoup affordance of chasing my dreams. And there is no level of gratitude that I could ever portray in this timeline for that. But she also was a voice of reason of like, this feels a lot right now, but I promise when you get into the clinic, it's going to feel lighter. It's there. The person in front of you at your eval doesn't know what you're looking for. So if you
Mhm.
should have done a full can test, but you did an empty can test, PTs have the luxury of being able to see our clients 2, maybe 3 times a week. We could just do it next time and the person doesn't know. Whereas your practical grader is knowing exactly what you're looking for, and that it's a different pressure, it's a different performance. No matter how you slice it, that is not the same scenario. And I understand safety, I understand competence, but there is a lack of understanding of the actual anxiety component of performance. And once that was explained to me and supported to me, I had a better way to conceptualize that in my brain. And so, but that is also saying it was my responsibility to know how my brain works. And I think that's really hard in a burnout situation, to be able to
Mhm.
be introspective. And that's where it might actually be the right time to take a step back. If you're not able to self reflect, if you are so deep in the drowning water, just to be able to look in and be like, what do I need? If and how does my brain work? It's a difference between like I know what I need and no one's listening versus I don't even know where to start or how I think or how I feel or where to look. There needs to be equal work on both sides of professors' advocacy and education of the options provided. And that's why I say use your disability services on campus. They're going to have those things for you. You're paying for them with your tuition. And then there's your own rule of how am I finding how my brain works? How am I communicating that? And how am I finding someone who can help me find words to that? The same way, we don't want our patients rehabbing their ankle sprains on YouTube, but they do have to look up PT clinics near me.
And that's a great point to bring up. You know, when you were talking, it reminded me of when I was in a practical. Mind you, I used to work like actually 60 hours a week at one point. It was
Hmm.
awful. But it's like what you said, I couldn't afford to live here, so I
Yeah.
had to work. Like there was no other way it could have been. And I was working 60 hours a week, studying really late at night, going to bed at like 4 a.m. to go wake up at literally 5 or 6 a.m. to go back to work. It was insane. And we come to a practical, and like you said, they're looking for XYZ, and I need to make sure I say XYZ or I don't pass this, even
Hmm.
though I spend so many hours in the day talking to people all day, every day. I don't get nervous. But then in this practical, I do. And what happened in the practical is I misheard the muscle that she wanted me to test. And it was something like extensor pollicis, and I heard abductor pollicis for some reason. And I'm doing the wrong thing. And I realized it midway that she had said something different. And I looked at her and I said, I know what this is. I was like, I just misheard you. Like, let me redo it. And then I just got so consumed that my hands started shaking, and then I looked at my proctor and I was like, I'm going to cry in 5 seconds, but I need a couple minutes, like, just
Yeah.
to regain.
I'd be failed for that because I'd have a very similar experience. And then they'd be like, I'm sorry, you can't cry in front of your patients. The practical is over. You can come back for your retake in 3 days. Like,
Exactly.
there was no grace for
Hmm.
being human.
And I would say I think my school's doing better on that, on like
I'm
letting us
happy, and I
break
hope mine is
down.
too.
Yeah. And hearing that you went through that process of you actually had no room for error.
It is practicing medicine. We are practicing medicine.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think that's what I really love about pelvic health is that there's a little bit more wiggle room. And especially like actually quite literally with bendy bodies and hypermobility and the overlap, there feels like there's less black and white in pelvic health. There's less room for there's a little bit more open mindset to tinker around and figure out.
To go off of, you transitioning into pelvic health, did you know that pelvic health is what you wanted? Mhm.
So my dad had spina bifida, and bowel and bladder stuff was always really normal growing up. So like there's just some times where you just had to help dad clean up, and that's what it was, right? Um so knowing that and also like wanting to go into obgyn and then looking at the requirements for med school and realizing that wasn't my path. Too much math. PT was that option, and then when I found pelvic PT existed, it was like this beautiful mend and mesh of everything I loved.
What would you say is the common misconception then that goes around pelvic health? Because I want to say it's not really talked about as much in my school. I do know about it,
Which is wild.
but
Get me in there. Like, I will be a guest lecturer, please. And that's the thing. It should not be an optional webinar. Like, book me in a class you have to sit in. Let me talk to you about an anus. I think the common misconception with pelvic floor is that it's only for women postpartum or pregnancy. But that's the common misconception is that like the amount of male and non-binary patients and transitioning patients that I see in my clinic, oh, it fills my cup. Because it's like a microact of feminism in a way too, of just being like, hey, women are here to treat everybody and we are here to treat you with dignity and respect. And there's amazing men in the pelvic health space too that are treating all kinds of pelvises. And then every single person who has an abdominal surgery should be seeing a pelvic floor PT because your intra-abdominal pressure is completely thrown off and you are setting yourself up for dysfunctions across the chains if we're not taking better care of the center of our bodies. And the fact that like an ACL is an immediate referral to PT, but a C-section isn't, I could talk for
Mhm.
6 podcasts on that.
And for our listeners that don't know what you just said and of the intra-abdominal pressure and
Oh,
and
yeah, sorry.
how that can be seen in C-sections, can you explain what that is?
So, for those listening, I'm holding an anatomical pelvis. And so, when we're thinking about it, it's called the pelvic floor because we have a ceiling, and that ceiling is our diaphragm, thin muscle that sits underneath the lungs. And they work in tandem, almost like this slinky, and that kind of falls on this trampoline. So, bones are stakes in the ground, keeping you stable. stable, ligaments are your springs, and the mesh, the red of the pelvic floor, is that mesh of the trampoline, accepting forces and giving forces. So if I have this kind of Coke canned pressure and I'm squeezing from the top and then I puncture the center, yeah, all my Coke is gonna and then if I try to plug that up, but I accidentally shook the can, now where's the pressure gonna go? Out the bottom, out the top. The diaphragm is so much stronger than the pelvic floor, respectably, just because of the pressures of the lungs, the back pressures of the lungs. And there's only one hole in the diaphragm for that inferior vena cava and stomach to come through, where there's 2 to 3 in the base of the pelvic floor that actually have more openings to it. So it has more ability to accept those forces. And so you're going to see that dysfunction, that gripping that happens. And if we're not handling that appropriately, guess what takes over? Your hips, your glutes, your low back. You're constipated all the time. Why am I constipated? You don't gotta buy the Grüns gummies. You gotta just work on your breathing of the pelvic floor.
So with your Instagram, you talked about the platform. Was
Right.
it your intention to build it to what it is now? And how did you do it?
My platform, I wanted to fail. I wanted it to not
Really?
exist. My platform started as a challenge from my therapist in grad school because the way I was coping was making memes and sending them to my 3 friends because I wanted a way to relate to them and relate to all of our communal suffering without having them worry and send me on a grippy sock vacation. So I wanted them to basically laugh with me. And so when my therapist asked me how I was coping, I was really struggling with that transition of, because again, I'm getting this feedback of, you are not enough. You're bottom of the top 10%. You can't be, you can't keep a composure in these fake patient situations, fail, fail, fail. And I'm like, man, no one's going to believe me. No one's going to think. And I shouldn't be responsible for a life or death situation if someone drops in my clinic, right? My license is on the line and their life, more importantly. And so she was like, how do you cope? I make memes. I sent her the memes. She's like, these are funny. She said, post them on the internet. I said, you're funny. And she said, I'm not lying. And then I said, no. And she said, this is your homework. And I'm like, Dan, I have a people pleasing tendency. Um, so I created DPTs with anxiety. I like things that rhyme. And I posted it completely anonymously. The first year of my page was completely faceless because I was like, no one can know that I'm mentally ill. And I mean, they already all knew, which is like crazy looking back on. but but I didn't want to like actually identify as unwell, despite that being what makes me really funny now. And so I posted the first one and I was like, great, no one's going to see this. No hashtags, no nothing. I'll tell my therapist. See, no one cares. And then like 30 people liked the post and I got like 10 followers. I'm like, who are you? Go away. And then she was like, great, next week, do another one. I'm like, oh. So it kind of like became like, when your therapist tells you to journal, like mine told me to post memes on the internet. And then I was like, oh, people care what I have to say. People think I'm funny. Like, I'm a middle kid. Like, I'm a grade A goofball. I love a stage. But that wasn't the persona I wanted to portray. I actually didn't want my most authentic self to be what I put on a stage. And so doing that was absolutely terrifying, and I wanted nothing to do with it. But it really took watching people thank me and for just being a goofball and making them feel better that I was like, oh, actually, I don't feel alone in this and no one's worried about me and I don't have to be perfect because no one is. And so it was that learning curve from everyone supporting me that came from a spot of undiagnosed ADHD. Sit down, shut up. Why are you too much? And now I have this platform and people are like, please give us more. It's addicting. It's addicting to make
Mhm.
people feel happy.
I've followed you for a while and it's just so authentically real. You say exactly what we think and no one has the guts to say it out loud and you say it.
I don't know how else to.
And that's like but you do make PT school feel like it's not that you're normalizing the fact that everyone is feeling the same way. as much as we don't even want to admit it. At the end of the day, a lot of people are gonna say, "No, I'm fine." But really, with your post, it's like, no, have you seen that meme where it's like, "Everything's fine," and it shows that one guy, like, hitting a pan on his head where he's
Oh,
like
man. Oh, yeah.
and
That doesn't go away after PT school. It just, becomes in different facets of your life, but we can, like, keep being funny about it.
have you gotten any DMs that are telling you stories that they're going through? And have they ever reflected on your posts and then told you, a story in their shoes that not even changed your perspective, but gave you that this
Validated why I do
yeah,
it. Yeah,
exactly.
and it's a dual-edged sword because there's sometimes parasocial relationships are very real. There have been times where people will comment things based on what the character I've put out there, her life, and ask me things like personally, and I'm like, "Oh, this is actually a boundary I have to set." That I'm as authentic as I am, I'm still a character of myself. And so, but they're on the most 95% of the conversations I have, more in person at things like CSM and stuff. I had this one gal and she was like, I was about to drop out of PT school. And then I saw someone else in my class share your meme. And I DM'd her and said, that's hysterical. And now we're graduating together in May. And that's the stuff, that's the community that I build. And it's so hard because, again, access to resources for some people, I may be the only person who's ever saying, hey, I hear you, I see you. And people are coming in with, like, hey, my professors are kicking me out of PT school. What do I do? And like, it's such this hard dance of like, I don't know all of the eggs in your basket. I want to support you and tell you, I don't know what you
Mhm.
did to interoceptively see what you may have needed and also reflect it back on. And also, this is probably something with a lot of brain power that I should be getting paid for, but it also sucks because you don't have access to this. And also, I didn't go to school for this. Like, physical comes before therapy. It's like I want to be such a good support pillar, but at some point I can't like, I feel like I can't legally give you advice. So
Mhm.
it's hard. It's a very hard parasocial balance. So what I've never gotten is like the only thing I've gotten direct hate on. I have one gal got really mad that I was selling out my page because I accepted a brand deal for a NPTE study guide that had a promo code that saved them money. And I was like, I'm so sorry. You enjoy my free content that I am deciding to get paid for to keep making you free content. I'm so sorry I hurt your feelings.
That Okay, that doesn't even make sense because that would be amazing. Like, you already have the platform of students, and now they're connecting you with a platform that's gonna also help students.
And she's like, "I liked you until you sold out." And I was like, "The internet is so silly."
I kind of want to transition now that you're talking a little bit more on the clinical side. I want to transition into that a little bit more. As a student going into clinical rotations, how was that experience for you?
Mixed,
Why?
mixed. So, from a perspective of knowing what I wanted and not being able to do it was frustrating, but I
Mm-hmm.
was also still very excited to get the groundwork and to not feel like I was under that intense scrutiny lens of practicals. And I felt like I
Mm-hmm.
got that on my first and my fourth clinical. So, hot take, I loved workers' comp. I loved a Concentra rotation. I had the best time of my life, because I had the most badass clinical instructor. I called her my Dura Mater because she was tough, she was fair, she was honest, but she gave me autonomy. And
Mhm.
when I would make mistakes, it was never a blame, it was an educational moment, and the way that she delivered that, right? Then I went to assisted living, and it was during COVID, so it really worked more like a sniff without the sniff credit, which was really hard. There was a lot of things outside of my control in that rotation in terms of where the world was that reflected back on me as a student and my shortcomings because of I was seen as an accessory tool to my CI and her productivity demands were being put under a magnifying glass. And so that trickled on to me of my productivity, how I'm billing Medicare, how I'm doing, and it just wasn't something. And I think as a second clinical student where I only had to be at like advanced intermediate, the expectation is that she didn't have the wiggle room for me to not be whatever the entry level because of the demands on her. And so I think that came to a lot of just let me do it. Just let me do it. And it did not instill confidence. And then the third one, the worst one in Peoria, Illinois, I have, a whole episode on my experiences in the cardiac ICU, but I was again kind of abandoned in the term of productivity and productivity bonuses then being put under hit the provider's name, because if you can have two students seeing two patients at a time, then you get three patients an hour, and then you're at 180% productivity, so you get a 30% bonus on your paycheck every month. There's different incentives, and I am really confused why there is not a financial again, same thing as like just the checklist of like, how are you failing your students versus how are you failing them? And so then I got to pelvic health, and it was like I belonged everywhere. So the birth of DPTs with anxiety came in between the skilled nursing and the cardiac. I'm actually really grateful to have built it then, because it was one of the few things fueling my spite, because I'm like, I can't be DPTs with anxiety if I get kicked out of PT school. And I was like, well, if I'm not going to do it for me, I'm going to do it for the people.
For the people.
The one thing I wish I knew and was communicated to me was talking with your director of clinical education is not weakness. And you do not have, if something feels wrong, if you are like, hey, is this my fault? Like, please stop thinking it is, because you're not entry level. Even when you're supposed to be entry level, you are not entry level. So like, if something feels wrong, or you're just like, hey, I had this weird conversation with a clinical instructor, like your DCE should be the person you email immediately, because that also then creates a paper trail that can be very helpful if they try to academic probation you for things that are out of your control and become very he said, she said. Because I remember talking to my DCE about, or she found out about all the crap that went on in Peoria 2 years later when I was talking at CSM about it. And she's like, why did you never tell me? And I was like, because it was my fault. And she goes, what are you talking about? And so knowing that that resource was available to me, and getting out of my own pride's way of thinking that I should be perfect, I think that's something that really holds up a lot of PT students. And it's so hard because they're the professors, you don't know which one is going to come back and be like, hey, I'm struggling. And they're like, well, you're bottom of the top 10%. And like, you don't know which one is going to give you, like, not hold your hand, but like, be like, no, brother, that's weird. That's a whack thing to say.
Yeah. I had two experiences of that where I had someone tell me, nope, you got to take a year, you're done. You can try and figure out how to catch up on another time. And then I went to another professor and said the same story. And they were like, okay, so what do we got to do? Like, what's going to help
Yeah.
you right now? And
Honestly, be
that
annoying. Bang on every door until you get the answer you want.
it's exactly what I did is I went to so many higher ups and was like, I'm going to quit this program because I'm falling out of love with what I'm studying right now. Are you going to help me or are you going to let me leave? I don't pay $14,000 a term for you to just let me go. Fight for me to stay and figure out how I can do this, because I don't pay $14,000 a term to only look at a screen and not have a teacher lecture me. Looking back on what you thought was a good clinician to now you're practicing at 5 years now, has that changed how you perceive to be a good clinician?
No, because I always wanted to be a clinician like my first clinical instructor, Claire. I wanted to be a Dura Mater. And I wanted to be a person like my mom is, where you don't just demand respect, you give respect to get respect. And it goes back to us being the best marketers in healthcare is I do not come to my patients with this paternalistic mindset of, okay, you have an ACL tear, this is what we're going to do. It is, hey, what are your goals? What do you want out of this? And every study you look at is going to tell you that helps your patient buy in, that helps your rapport with patients. Like there are some hard nuts to crack in my field of work. No pelvic pun intended there, but it is those little nudges. And yeah, like I think that the best providers are the ones that go a little bit outside of the textbook and become a little bit more creative.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like we're also at a time now where it's almost even harder to do that
Mhm.
because of with documentation. And like you said, you work in a cash base, so it's easier in that term of being able to be personable with the patient. But let's say you go to a mill. I worked at a clinic where you saw 20 people in the first 4 hours with multiple clinicians. And it was, for the aide, it was hard. I can speak on it as an aide. I can't even imagine for the clinician. But what I can say is what I observed. And it becomes a little more robotic of like, okay, you have XYZ, I'm going to give you this. You have this, I'm going to give you this. How many times are you going to, prescribe bridges and then not explain it to them of why they need to do the bridges? And that's where
or
something
how to do
like,
them right.
exactly, exactly. And then, I have a very, I mean, maybe you're on the same topic as me, but I have a very like controversial thing where I don't want aides if I ever like become a clinician. As much as I know I'm going to need the help if I'm going to run like crazy, I just, they're not trained to see what I see. And they're not, unless they have that background, then maybe I would feel more comfortable. But at the end
And
of the
and
day,
and, just clarifying, aides versus assistants, correct?
yes,
Versus okay, yes.
not PTAs, but like techs, yeah,
No, the
and
tech should be there to help you clean between patients, bring patients back and forth. They should not be supervising what I prescribe. That is like asking
exactly,
a
exactly.
teenager to go and tell John in room 4 how to take his opioids correctly. Like, do you understand the level of liability we're working with here?
That is a hill I would die on because it's like I am never, ever, ever going to put my supervision onto an aide and say, you know what, they got it. They can do it. And you know what? Also, if you think it's too easy for them, make it harder. I would never in my life do that with an aide. Like you, most of the times, and I can say it because I did it. I was still getting my bachelor's when I was an aide. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't know what multifidus was. I didn't
Mhm,
know what piriformis was. I had
mhm,
no idea. And they're like, do the multifidus exercise. And I'm like, okay, Mr. Google, I'm going to look this up today. Like, and it's
mhm.
like, do I really want to put my license on the line and that liability? And like, if I get subpoenaed, did you see the exercise? No, I gave it to the aide. What, how is that going to help you?
Yep. And I think, personally, again, when I think about clinician buyout, the privilege I have in pelvic is that it is so nuanced. And I think the idea of making like it's so again, it's that delicate dance of access to, you know, so
Yeah. I do want to hit on one thing with pelvic health. So a lot
mhm,
of the times, and this is what I've noticed of like when I'm talking to pelvic health professionals, you do get a lot of hard stories. A lot of the time, something is going on that got them there. It's never I would say a lot of the times of what I hear, it is trauma based. Something is happening and it's
mhm.
trauma to the person, subjective to what they're going through. But either way, it's a heavy topic that you get through. As a clinician, how do you hear those stories and not take it home and let that bog you down on how you're feeling? Because what you're doing is huge for the community. But how do you protect yourself from not letting it come with you?
I do let it come with me. I just don't care about it because you have to go in with a baseline of the world sucks and bad things are going to happen. And that's my job. That's my job security. No one's coming to me on a good day. And I think that's also where we get into a lot of conversations. And it's actually like, one of my biggest hot takes is you cannot prevent burnout. You can only prolong the space in between. And a huge reason of why us as providers burn out so quickly is because we care too much. It makes us damn good providers, but we care way too much because we are taught to look at all of the external factors and try to synthesize that into something that matters to somebody. And that's a
Hmm.
lot to do in a split second. So when I have patients who come in and the pelvic floor never fails you, the pelvic floor, unless there is direct trauma, and even when there is, it is always a result of some kind of trauma, whether it be the emotional withholding, and it is never a failure of the pelvic floor. It is an overprotective mechanism. Pelvic floors have problems when they are overprotective. And I think that reframing it in that way and understanding that when patients are talking to you, they they are coming to you for musculoskeletal guidance. But you are probably the first person who's going to listen to them. So they're going to tell you everything outside of musculoskeletal. But they're only so similar to how your clinical instructor is just looking for you to say XYZ. These
Mm-hmm.
patients are really just coming in for musculoskeletal care. Anything else you give them is extra. And so that's why, and it really took actually my husband to understand that the validation in someone just being like, that sucks. They don't want you to fix their problems. I do not have 34,000 followers because I'm fixing people's anxieties. I have 34,000 followers because I am validating their experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think as physical therapists, we actually kind of have to shift out of a fixer mindset and understand that, like, at baseline, things are going to suck. And it actually really sucks that it happens to the people you really like more often than the people who, like, probably deserve it. And there's that level of, like, this sucks, so what am I going to do about it? I'm going to give them the best damn musculoskeletal care they can because they have all of this going on plus knee pain. If I alleviate their knee pain, they have more space to handle the other stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
that's enough. That's enough. And having someone you can jump into.
Mm-hmm. I like how you explained all of that because I think with me personally, I do get attached very easily where and I was a caregiver once and I did it for 3 years and I had a patient where every win was a win for me and every loss I felt it just as deeply as he did. And then I was most money I've ever made in my life, but I was miserable. I
Mm.
just was not happy and I could not turn it off. And I think I'm doing better at it, like where I can detach myself.
And sometimes baseline there, that's love, right? That's familial
Yeah.
love.
Mhm.
Because I feel the same way about Jake, who I cared for in St. Louis. Yeah.
Mhm. And that's where I don't want to lose the part of myself that got me in the profession in the first place. You know what I mean? I want to have that boundary, but that gray area is what makes people connect. And I don't want to lose that either. And I think that's the biggest question, at least for me. If I get anything from it, it would be this question. Like, I get, and that's where it's like, it's also something a lot of PTs don't have either. Like what we were just talking about. Sometimes we have robots in the clinic and you gotta, like you said, you gotta dance the line a little bit, figure out what you gotta do to balance it all.
And I think it's a little silly too. And a little bit of that, like, paternalistic, ableisticness of PTs of, like, a lot of us are the stereotypical, I got injured, so I became a PT. And my adversity is what made me stronger. Yet when our patients are going through adversity, we see it as a personal challenge for us to have to fix instead of just assisting them in their guidance on how they can actually accomplish it themselves. Like, who are we to
Mhm,
rob them of their own adversity story?
mhm,
Mm.
mhm,
And so, like, asking that of, like, yeah, this person's going to struggle, but, like, you're going to have some cool battle scars to tell. And that's part of their journey. And I'm just the person who validated that it sucked in that time. And if
mhm.
I didn't have my own adverse, would I be as funny? Who's to say?
And, as we close out here, I do got one question for you.
Mhm.
What advice would you say sounds simple, but is actually hard to live without?
Oh, stop caring so much.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's it. Stop caring so much. It's so hard. So hard to not care.
Yep.
It's so hard. Like, to be in healthcare and not care. Like, I am just health.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. I love talking to you again.
Yes!
Yeah.
This is so fun. I'm a yapper. Thanks for letting me butt over you in, like, so many things. I'm like, but I have so much to say.
No, I want you to. I want that.
Good. I'm glad.
Yeah. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow along for more conversations like this. because the Ring Collective has always been about more than physical therapy. It's about the people in the profession, the stories that shape them, and the paths that remind us there's more than one way to grow. Wherever this journey finds you, I hope something here reminds you that you belong. See you next time.
1,